Ajuna. Can you join us? Right, can we give a round of applause? Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all, for having me. Super excited to be here. This sign is really cool, by the way. If anyone wants to get a picture of me with the sign. I need a new headshot, that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, cool. I hope you're having a good morning. Excited to talk to you about learning from incidents. And where I usually like to start is talking about how I hate endings, which is weird to start with, but I will. Essentially, at the end of movies is when I'm most invested in it. This is the, what are they called again? End credits for Black Panther, but any Marvel movie I'm super into. I'm gonna let y'all know now, so many Marvel references today. Please just take that in. If you're gonna complain about it later, happy to chat about it. Trent Michael has some cool Marvel stickers, so if you want some, I did already take some, but left some for the others over there. But anyway, the reason I hate endings, or at least have a love-hate relationship with them, is I find them really interesting. Usually when I'm super into something, it's at the end, and I know some of that is storytelling. But for example, in the first Marvel movie, at the end, the first Avengers movie, it's a classic superhero movie, right? Aliens invade New York, they demolish the city, Avengers assemble, beat the baddies, arrest them, and then they kind of relax, which I get. As folks who are on call, we totally need that moment after the incident to kind of like chill and relax a little bit. But also like half of New York does not exist anymore, and these guys are like eating. And I'm like, this doesn't seem appropriate right now, but I also sort of get it. But thinking about the cleanup that comes after these big incidents is what kind of inspired this talk. If you have watched more Marvel movies, the Spider-Man movie, the first one, Homecoming, this is the villain of the movie. So at the beginning, he's actually in charge of cleaning up the mess from the first Avengers movie. And while he's working on that, he works for a salvage business. They realize that, let's not have like any business take care of this. These are some very high intensity pieces that were broken apart during this first fight. There's alien technology anywhere, and they fire him, and he has some of that technology and gets so angered and finds another path that he just like becomes a villain because of what happened in the first one. And it reminded me of when you kind of create things during the solving of an incident that become a problem for the next incident. Have you ever like written a script to do some actions without any of the safety rails in place, and someone's like, that looks cool, I want to touch all the nodes at once, and then that causes another incident? This kind of reminded me of that. So already connecting these two, I was thinking about incident life cycles, right? And how we learn from incidents in general. So here is an incident life cycle. It starts off with some impact. Hopefully your systems tell you might be using Datadog, that something went wrong, it pages the right person, they go find out what's going on, and I'm kind of fluffing that middle part, and then it leads to stability in your systems again, and then you mark it as resolved. And then you come to this instant follow-up part. And the instant follow-up part is a bit complex. We know what it's supposed to involve. We have the immediate action items, all the cleanup that we need to do, and then we have to capture and save any relevant information. If you're using IRC, Slack, or some other messaging service, those messages disappear very quickly. You gotta take note of which ones were super helpful or which ones say, we did this thing but didn't work, so you can update your runbooks or whatever. And then you write up and do any more investigation, right? You might have a post-mortem or post-incident doc, post-incident review meeting, and then there's maybe any additional follow-up remediation work, all that work that goes into your backlog and you never look at it again, right? This is kind of what goes in incident follow-up. And we know why we should do incident follow-ups. Just to remind us all, a lot of it is continuous learning. I like to think of incidents as unplanned investments into the reliability of our services. We didn't plan for things to go badly, and we have to learn from that experience. All of the all of what was highlighted during the incident is of how brittle our systems were and where. So that makes us better engineers as we work through it and make our systems a little bit better throughout that process. We have to also reconcile actions across an organization. Rarely does an incident just touch one part, so kind of coordinating with other teams about who's going to work on what so we're not duplicating is something that also is helpful and needs to happen. We have obligation to our customers. You might have service level agreements, service level objectives, and they want to know what happened, because if they depend on you for something and you can't provide that, a conversation needs to happen at least. And that investment reliability I talked about. So if you've been in incident retrospective, there's some best practices you might have heard about. I'm going to go over a few. If there's any more, shout them out and I'll add them in the deck from next time I give this presentation. One is blamelessness. We hear about this one a lot. Essentially, we want to know that when we're going into one of these, everyone's going into it assuming good intent with the other folks that are there. Everyone's doing their best, or what they can at any moment. If someone's actively trying to break your system, that bad actor has to get out of there. Otherwise, everyone didn't intend for the system to break that way. They were working with the knowledge they had when they built it. Another part is ownership. Incidents usually are needing that coordination I mentioned. We need to coordinate between different teams, who's going to work on what. We want to get as much return on that unplanned investment as we can. And so, for example, at Datadog, we have incident commanders for our post-incident process. So we have an owner to make sure that we get all of our incidents to a kind of completed state. And just like a regular incident commander, they're not in charge of working on the entirety of the incident review, but kind of coordinate with all the relevant people to make sure that we do get there. Collaboration, right? That incident commander reaches out to all the teams that are involved, so we have all the relevant information, screenshot all the relevant graphs, put them in there. If there's an issue that's larger than one team, we do it together. We're solving it for everyone. Another part that's helpful for incident retrospectives is timeliness. We don't have a ton of time to capture these details while they're fresh in our memory. So, for example, we try to have a draft in 5 days. A public postmortem might take longer than that, but an internal postmortem should kind of come up a little bit quicker. Like I said, Slack messages expire in 30, so we're really trying to get that out there when we can. And that's a little bit easier for whatever team and tools you're using. We have notebooks within Datadog as part of our incident management product, and we use it internally, and generating the postmortem and adding the details is a little bit easier. Just as much automation as you can add to your process with whatever tool you're using can be helpful. So, I wanted to take a pause here and ask folks, how do y'all feel about post-incident reviews, retrospectives? Anyone enjoys the process? One very half-hearted hello. Okay, who is not a fan, completely? You know you gotta do it, but it's it's like vegetables. Okay, I would say that I get that a lot. Maybe there's a lot more pain in this room as well. It's usually a little bit closer to 25, 75. 75, not a fan. I would say that probably a lot of you are feeling pain from maybe a previous time you've done this, and I feel that a lot. I would say that I also, even when talking to y'all and knowing that it's something we should do, also kind of ooh, whenever it's a big one as well. So I'd like to chat about it a little bit. So in my first incident, where I felt like this was actually my first big incident where I was actually incident commander when I was a baby SRE. So it was a few years ago. I was working on a virtualization team, and I'm not, Justin covered this a little bit earlier, but if you haven't looked at virtualization in a while, how it essentially looks, and this is similar to my team's then kind of architecture. You have hardware where you have your virtual machines on, so that can be physical, like this diagram. It can be in the cloud. We had both. And then you have a hypervisor. You have an operating system on top of that, and then you have a hypervisor that manages each of your virtual machines. And within each of your virtual machines, they also have an operating system as well. So the reason I bring this up was my project was to make sure that every operating system that we had was reinstalled to a new version. So not only all the ones on the hardware, under the hypervisor, but all the individual ones in the virtual machines as well. So that was fun. It wasn't as bad as I thought, because for the ones that we owned, we already had the technology to move all of our virtual machines from one machine or cluster to another. It helped us when we had outages to just move all the virtual machines, deal with the bad machine, and then move them back. So we did that and reinstalled, and that didn't take very long. But then I had to reach out to every owner of every virtual machine that we had, and this was in the tens of thousands. And I was like, hey, reinstall your machine. And some people liked that, but most people did not. They used these machines as a personal machine, but a lot of them used servers that we provided for them. So I sent emails. I sent a lot of emails, and that was fine. I didn't mind it. We had this automated already. But I don't know if you know, but people don't read their emails, so these were just going in, and I would just not get responses. And I was like, that's kind of rude. So it'll be like, hey, in a quarter, 90 days, you gotta reinstall, or we'll delete your server. And they're like, okay, 60 days. Okay, at the 30-day mark, I switched off their servers, and I was like, hey. So people reached back out, and they're like, what do you mean? I didn't read your email. I was like, read my email. And so they reinstalled, and we worked with them. But at some point, we were at the deadline, and I talked to my team. I was like, hey, we have a long tail, as we all do with any large-scale project. And they were like, don't worry about it. Just delete it. And I was like, great. The best way to be done with a project is to delete all the remaining work that you have. So I was feeling real good about it, deleted all of them. Until someone paged me. They're like, hey, you deleted my server. And I was like, yeah. Read the email. I'm really sorry. Here's a new machine with all the same specs. And they were like, can you recreate the server for me? Like, what's inside of it? And I was like, no. I did my part. I gave you a new server. Do you have all of the startup projects, like DevOps best practices? You got to have disaster recovery. Do you have those? And they did not. This was an internal team for an internal service, so they didn't really have a ton of DevOps or SRE folks on the team, so they just had never reinstalled their server from scratch before. And the person who created their server left, so they also did not know how that process went. And they're like, "That you gotta have backup somewhere," and I was like, I do not. That was on you to create backups of your own server. And so we immediately went into the incident retrospective, right? So if we think about the follow-up, there wasn't any cleanup to do because it was too clean. That was the issue that we were having. The relevant data was my emails, and that was kind of it. And when we declared the incident, there wasn't a ton. And then we obviously had the investigation of what happened. So noted that they didn't update their info on who owns that server, so they didn't see my emails. That was a project that we were also trying to work on. We had known that we have these large percentage of our machines that we do not have updated owners on, but we were hoping that we would capture a lot of them by turning off their server, but they didn't use it often enough that they didn't notice when it was on. Or they had automation to just, when something was down, to just retry turning it back on, and they just kept going. And then kind of came up the remediation work. But where the pain came from for me is that in their postmortem, it said, Ajuna deleted our server, so we were down. And I was just like, hey, that's rude. We said it was blameless. What is going on here? But I also, now looking back, kind of get it. Like, I made this team all of a sudden have to deal with not having a server anymore, and that's hard. I did my part. I checked with my team. I got all the approvals and everything. But still, like, they were mad at me, the face of their problem at the time. The next problem was that who's the owner? We were kind of going back and forth and like, hey, you own the thing. And I'm like, I gave you a new server, but we don't have, it's not the way it was. And I was like, that was on you. And so we really went back and forth on like, how much can we help this team? But at the same time, if they didn't do all the best practices, there's not too much we can do to get them back to where they were, because we completely started them from scratch in a lot of ways. But my team was awesome. I really enjoyed it. My manager, my team lead, all supported me. We changed that postmortem to say virtualization team, deleted our server because of reasons. And that got a little bit better. Another thing we were able to share a little bit after that was the reason we had to reinstall all of our operating systems was we were dealing with a vulnerability. So this was around Spectre. So we could not have any machines that had the old operating system on it. So that was really why we had to delete them. We couldn't just turn them off or leave them in that state. So that made it a little bit easier. I wasn't told that in advance because we heard about it through the grapevine as a person who owns large amounts of machines with that operating system, that vulnerability was there, but they hadn't announced it globally yet, to give us that lead time to work on that before we were taken advantage of. So this leads me to the idea of we know things to be true and the best practices, but when do these things become the culture that we need them to be, right? How do we practice all the best practices so that when we are super frustrated, we can actually do them to the best case scenario? We've heard of Hug Ops and all of these things, but how do we make sure that we can do them? And not only do I understand when that team's frustrated, but they also don't blame me specifically for what's going on. So I looked into this a little bit, and I heard of something called the learning pyramid. And I've simplified it here and also put it in quotes because some people hate this thing. They just do not believe that it's a real thing. But in short, what it kind of talks about is we have different ways of learning. We learn, first of all, by reading about things, attending talks, and then we learn about things by writing about them. So if you are processing something, you write down your thoughts. If you're on a new team, you read the old code, then you write some new code. And then the next way we learn is by doing. So we start running the code in production. We start playing around with things. All of that really gets us to be learning a little bit better. And then when we're really at a good place, we can teach. So we become a leader on the team. We mentor other people, and all of that kind of gets us into a deeper place of learning. So when I showed this incident life cycle, I kind of lied because it's a little bit more cyclical, because each of the instances that we have, we use those learnings into the next one. And if you are a newer SRE, as you explore that system, or a DevOps person, you go into the next incident a little bit more knowledgeable about what worked and didn't work next time, right? And this is supported by the Google SRE books. This is from the chapter about accelerating SREs to become on call. So on the left, it kind of is talking about learning, and as time goes by, we're thinking about how to become a better SRE, right? We're reading some postmortems, we're reading documentation, and then we're writing to those as well. And then we do some disaster role play. So that's part of the doing, shadowing on call. And then you are on call, reverse engineering things, you're breaking real things, and then you're able to become a leader and an owner. And so you become kind of in that doing section and teaching. So it kind of does give some support to this learning pyramid thing that I wasn't too sure about. So for this next section, I wanted to chat a little bit about learning from incident retrospectives. I currently do not work as an SRE anymore. I work in developer advocacy. So I don't get a chance to be in incidents anymore, for better or for worse. So I'm more in the first section of that. I'm more in the reading section. And I wanted to see how much can I learn about new things by reading interesting retrospectives. So I am not a networking person. I have more of a software background, and I kept hearing this, that it's been 0 days since it was DNS. It's always DNS. You thought it was, but then it wasn't, but then it was. And I was like, okay, why? I know what DNS is. I've heard about it. There's this great site called howdns.works that really walks you through it. It's a little cartoon. So I was like, I kind of get it, but why is everyone always mad at DNS? What they do? And there was an interesting outage that happened in October 2021. Meta but specifically what hurt me was WhatsApp went down for like 6 hours, from like 11 a.m. Eastern to like 5 p.m. Eastern, which was like a majority of my day. I'm from Tanzania. I talk to my family primarily through WhatsApp, and was surprised that they were so quiet all day. And then my mom sent me an SMS, and it was like an email. It was really weird to get. I was just like, what is going on? And so I went to go read their public postmortem to find out what happened, and I heard it was DNS involved. So I was like, okay, let me hear what's going on. So to walk you through their incident a little bit, this is a flow of their networking traffic and how it kind of involves folks. So essentially, as a user, you interact with Facebook and their servers through the internet, through points of presence that they have, and you touch their networking backbone, and that's what connects us to their data centers. So essentially, while they were doing some routine maintenance to check whether all of their connections in their backbone were up, they accidentally took them all down. And they had auditing to try to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that failed too. So what really became the problem is when Facebook's DNS servers couldn't connect to the primary data centers, they stopped advertising to their Broadway gateway protocol, and that assumed that they were unhealthy. So while the DNS servers were up, there was nothing connecting them. So the border gateway protocol just deleted all of the access to those DNS servers. And as such, you couldn't route to their DNS or to their data centers at all. So everything was down. What was really interesting here is all of their systems were connected in this way, so nothing was working, including getting access to their data centers to connect to see what was going on. So they were locked outside. And I found that very funny. I felt for them. I had friends who worked there. They just had a day off, just on purpose, because they couldn't get access to go back inside. So they broke into their data centers and were able to get things back up, but that really took a while. And that was very interesting to me, and it made me realize, like, okay, that's what the impact of DNS is, and gave me a little bit more understanding of how all of these things are connected. And as such, I learned a little bit about it just from reading a postmortem, which I enjoyed. The next section I wanted to cover very briefly is learning from other incident responders. I enjoy going to incident review meetings. I find it really cool. I find out ways that our systems are connected. And I would love to hear from you as well. I'm glad that you're here to hear from my incidents. I want to hear from your incidents. I find them really cool. I listen to a lot of talks about incidents as well. There's this really cool one I heard recently about incident archaeology. So it kind of thought about a person as an archaeologist going into their system to go look at all of their incidents to see what's going on. What was cool from this is it wasn't really about an incident that happened in their system, but kind of looking at all of their incidents to see what's going on. So when are they happening? They talked a little bit about how they were having folks who were really worried about being on call for the first time. So they went and looked at all their incidents and found out that actually a majority of them happened during the day. So if you're worried about being on call at night by yourself, that actually happens 10% of the time or less, which if I was going to be on call, that would help me a lot. So that was really cool. Another also talked about kind of the meta side of instance, about how we train folks to be in instance, not our incident commander, but actually the people who respond. So they kind of know the ebb and the flow of the systems as they work. I enjoyed that one as well. So to recap a little bit, I think of instance as being complex, and I know we all do as well, but I think the part that I actually find the most complex is the process and the people. We know our technology super well, but when we are dealing with instance, the part that really takes some time is to do all the things in the right ways. So the more we can get better at that, practice and learn from it can be really helpful. And especially these best practices we talk about, if they've not become second nature to you, it's hard to kind of pull them through when you're feeling very emotional because you're woken up at 2 a.m. and some person just tells you they deleted your server and you're like, oof, that's kind of mad. So learning how to learn can be really helpful. And we can learn from anywhere, and all retrospectives, even ones that are not involved with technology at all, too. I like reading about transportation retrospectives. They hit a bit closer to home because sometimes they involve things like loss of life and kind of remind me that there are bigger problems than not being able to access the social media site for a few hours. So you might have seen this if you've used Sudo before. I just wanted to remind us that part of our responsibility as DevOps engineers, SREs, is that we have a lot of great power, and with that comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben said it first. Sudo took it from Uncle Ben, if you were ever curious about that. And that brings me back to another ending. So I'd like to wrap it up and say that I'm really thankful for all of you to be here and chat with me. I'll be here for the rest of the conference, want to hear about your incidents, happy to talk about Datadog and Marvel movies, all of the above. My name is Ajuna Kyaruzi. I work as an SRE and DevOps advocate at Datadog. This is my contact information. I have not gotten to Mastodon yet because I am lazy, but you can tweet at me, I will respond. Other sites work too, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
I can take questions.
Oh, yeah. We do have time for some questions. Any questions, Jill?
Later, that's totally cool. Later works, cool, thanks.
Thank you so much.